What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to my vlog, and it's about time I cover something I was initially thinking about doing with my Hot Topics series over the summer, but I didn't really have the time for it. It just kind of didn't fit in with that progression. But given recent events, I figure I should probably talk about this. I've been wanting to try and tackle the issue of racism in some way. I've actually tried recording this same video. This is like the fourth time over now because I've had a hard time kind of wrapping my head around all the different angles and just I haven't really been able to fully express all the different thoughts that I've had on this. First off, I may just say, yes, racism is a thing in the US. It exists. Some people are racist. Some are not. But it is out there. And yes, I do believe that there is such a thing as police brutality, and it's not justified. There are far better things that can be done in just about any of these situations that we hear about. I acknowledge all that. Yes, there are some serious problems in this country. However, to kind of paraphrase one of my friends, who is actually African American himself, I don't think that it's actually as bad as we think it is. I certainly don't think it's any worse than it was in the 60s. I don't think it's even really any worse than it has been since then. But we're more aware of it now because of the internet and social media and people having smartphones with cameras that can record anything that they come across. So it's not that it's more of an issue than it has been since the 60s. It's that we're more aware of the issue. Plus, now there are these movements similar to movements that there were back in the 60s. But the modern day variants of these are Black Lives Matter, the flag kneeling, sitting, raising fists, protest things, which honestly, a lot of people are in a bit of a fit over that. I don't think that's the big issue at hand. Little aside though, if you have to choose one of those, I would say go with the kneeling because it's the most respectful gesture and it still says, hey, I don't hate this country, I just don't like what's going on in it right now. A lot of people are focused on some of these really minor aspects of it, when on the whole, there's a lot bigger stuff going on. We focus on these isolated incidents scattered all across the country that, yeah, when you put them all together, it sounds really bad. But not to sound callous or anything like that, but people die all the time. White people, black people, Asians, Mexicans, all people are dying at the hands of police even. All sorts of people are dying all the time. So, I mean, they shouldn't be. Certainly not at the hands of police. But it happens, and while some of it might be racially charged, I don't think there's as much of it that is, race-based as people seem to think it is. I think the media is kind of perpetuating this a little bit. I don't know, it's kind of a popular thing to say that police are being racist, and it kind of goes along with actually the general theme of discontentment that this year has been about, especially in areas like the political realm and talking about the election this year. There's just this overall feeling of discontent. That's the only reason why Donald Trump has any kind of a chance. I'll go back and say that I don't think racism in our country is quite as bad as the media and like half of the internet and a whole bunch of other sources would lead us to believe that it is. Partially because of what I said before, but also because when you look at other countries, I mean, not all other countries, but many other countries, they have just far less freedom in general compared to us. I'll give a couple of examples of this. One, I was, I heard one of the teachers here from the school talking at lunch about how, they were going over different liberties that we have, different freedoms that we have in the United States. And one of those was talking about how we can, we have freedom of speech. We can say what we want to say about our government, our law enforcement, and other such things. We can say what we want to about those without being thrown in jail and getting in trouble right on the spot. Many other countries do not have that freedom. Even like he was talking about this with the students there, some of which come from all sorts of different countries. We have students here from China, from Serbia, from various African countries. I think he mentioned specifically one of the Serbians was confused by this and was like, wait, so in this country you can say something bad about the president and not get in trouble for it? It's that confusing of a concept to people in some other countries because it just doesn't happen there. It's against the law. So in that realm, we in the US have a lot more freedom than other countries do to express our dissatisfaction with certain situations. And in this case, the issue of police being violent towards African Americans, black people, however you want to word it. So there's that aspect of it. But then the racism that exists in other countries is far worse. It's even more so systematic than it is here in the US. Now, you might think that, with all the police brutality and stuff that's going on, you think that there's a potential that maybe it's a systematic thing. I think it's more so just different people in different places at different times are not necessarily doing the best job that they can of, de-escalating a situation, of, properly evaluating what's going on before turning to violent responses. But anyway, so the other kind of story example that I'm going to mention in terms of why I don't think racism is as big of an issue in this country as many people lead us to believe is that, okay, so I have a friend who is doing, I guess you'd call it missionary work in Africa. I mean, it's not missionary work in the typical sense that you would think of missionary work. It's more so focused on raising awareness, kind of like we do here in the US, about, raising awareness, but also kind of, in a sense, training people of good, peaceful ways to protest the racism and injustice that is going on in Africa. Sorry, Phil, I forget exactly which country you're doing this in, so I apologize for that if you happen to be watching this. This friend of mine, Phil, is experiencing firsthand a lot of the governmental corruption. He even experienced firsthand some of it himself. All he was doing was educating these people about ways to, peacefully protest various things, but in particular, the racial and social injustice going on around him. Merely educating people, that's all he was doing. He was not starting up any riots. He wasn't, doing anything to try and overthrow the government. But because he was leading anything that was protest based, anything that said, there's something wrong here, because of that, he wound up getting thrown into kind of the local jail for a little while. Certainly not by our country's standards. He didn't do anything wrong. But the governmental social systems in other countries are just so much more corrupt, so much more hush hush, you can't say anything bad about us, that kind of stuff just happens. And there's like hardly any way you can fight against it. That's the way it is in a lot of other countries. There's hardly anything that you can do to combat the just inherent racism, corruption, injustice that's going on because of the way that their law, government, enforcement system is set up. So, when people complain about racism and injustice and corruption in the United States, just putting a reminder out there that it is far, far worse in many other countries. With that being said, I still acknowledge that, yes, there is a problem with racism in the US. Some people are racist. That's just kind of how it is. And until things are pretty much at a level playing field for everybody, which I doubt they'll ever be, at least not until, the world as we know it ends, Jesus returns, and new heaven and new earth kind of situation. Until that happens, I don't think there's ever going to be complete social, racial, economic equality across the board. There are going to be some people who have their biases, who act on those and treat other people unfairly because of those biases. At the same time, that does not justify some of the more violent protesting that has been going on recently. I'm all for the peaceful, gestures of protest, the whole kneeling, any of that stuff during the national anthem to help raise awareness. Sure, go for it. Because that's not hurting anybody. Compare that to some of the riots and things like that have been going on that are damaging property, that are injuring people, that are doing all sorts of basically violent acts to try and protest violent acts. It doesn't work. Violence only begets violence. B, there are far better ways to do it, and C, you're really just setting the people on edge that you're protesting against in the first place. All these violent riots and that kind of stuff are not helpful. We dealt with this back in the 60s. The groups of people that won out and were convincing were the ones that, sure, they didn't just sit on their hands and do absolutely nothing, but they weren't going out there bashing in police cars. They were peaceful protesters that won out in the end. History has shown over and over and over again, violence does not help solve violence. It might seem like it does for a while, but it only promotes further discontentment. With all that being said, I can't just say that I completely support any of the violent protests that have been going on, any of the reactionary, hey, let's go specifically target and kill police officers because we don't agree with them killing black people. Am I going to say that they're completely unjustified in their feelings and their attitude? No, because this is an unjust situation. And you have every right to be angry, frustrated, furious, insert similar terms there. But if you're protesting violence then violence is not the way to protest against it, because you're only creating more violence. Yeah, when it comes to all of this, it's a problem. It's a problem in all sorts of different ways. But I don't think it's as much of a problem as the media is leading us to believe that it is. It's just that we're more aware of it now than we have been. And B, if you're going to take a stand against this, do it in a peaceful way, because violence is only met with more anger and more violence. Also, on top of the protesting and all of that, I think we as a nation, as a country, as a group of people, any of us that actually care about this issue, need to think about what actions we're taking to actually help the people that are victimized by this injustice. I will say, good on you, tip of the proverbial cap to Colin Kaepernick, because he then, after showing a visual sign of solidarity, of support, of saying, hey, there's an issue here, he went out and actually donated money and is trying to help people that are victimized by this racial injustice that exists in our country. If we're going to, say that we truly support a cause, that we're not content with the way that things are, we need to also check our own hearts, our own motives, and our thoughts on, okay, what are we actually going to do to help solve the problem? Or at least support those that have been victimized by this problem. So to kind of wrap this up, I'm going to give a little bit more on each side of the situation. Now, my one friend from college, Phil, the same guy that's doing stuff in Africa, basically, there were times when he was walking through downtown Harrisburg, and one particular time, he just happened to walk by a black man, I don't really know the age, who was pushing one of those shopping carts along, as a lot of poor / homeless people do. He didn't say specifically that the man was poor or homeless, but that's my guess based on the whole pushing the shopping cart scenario. So anyway, he walks past this man, and just a couple seconds later, he notices this man is being surrounded by some police officers. They're raiding the guy's shopping cart full of stuff, and there didn't seem to be anything that the man was doing wrong. So my friend Phil just turns around, and he's trying to get a feel for the situation. He just wants to know what's going on. And essentially, they just kind of try to brush him off, push him aside, get my friend Phil out of the situation, since he wasn't involved in the first place. Given what I know, there didn't seem to be any particular reason for them to be on edge or, wanting to just, act that way. But that's how it was. And there were just other incidences of similar kinds of things that my friend Phil noticed happening in downtown Harrisburg. And there's stuff like that going all across the country. But then on the other side of the situation, my older sister used to work with the Baltimore Police Department. She wasn't one of the officers, but she was dealing with the forensics and that kind of stuff, and because she had to go to the crime scenes, she had to go through some of the same kinds of training and that kind of stuff. So she knows firsthand that for police officers or other people involved in a crime scene, or really just any situation like that, you never really know what you're getting into. Even with something as routine as, pulling somebody over on the highway, You don't know what all they've got in the car. You don't know how they're going to react to you pulling them over. And there's all sorts of variables that can complicate and make the situation more potentially deadly that these officers have no clue about when they're getting into any of this. So most of the time, I can understand if they're already kind of slightly on edge a little bit. I don't think that justifies some of the quick trigger fingers that some of them have had in these generally non-confrontational situations, or at least what should have not been confrontational. But still, point being, I can understand both sides of the story. I just don't think either extreme is justified by any means. I know that was a lot to take in. I'm hoping it all made sense. If not, feel free to comment with questions, thoughts, complaints, criticisms, whatever. Just try not to get too angry, violent, whatever in your responses to this, because especially with my understanding being that the violence and the just overall anger over this issue is part of the problem. It's part of the reason why people are overreacting on both sides. Especially with that in mind, I'm going to be, monitoring comments and stuff like that. Certainly feel free to leave them, and it'll take some pretty extreme stuff for me to justify in my mind that it's worth taking down. If it goes too far, just know that I'm not going to stand for it. Because that's what this whole video I'm making is about. I'm not going to stand for just this unjustified, over-the-top violence, anger, extremism on both sides. If you're curious about my thoughts on other kind of hot topics that have happened this year and you haven't seen my summer series, I'm going to leave a link to that, maybe somewhere in the video here, but also definitely down in the description. That's going to do it for this time around, I guess. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. I hope we're all doing well, and I will see you in the next video. Later.